All right, shalom, shalom, family. Shabbat shalom. It is the Sabbath day today, and I'm out here on the river. The boats are locked up, and then my big boat is gone somewhere, so I won't be able to get out on the water, unfortunately. But this is a nice, cool area. I wanted to talk about Moses today and do a theory of everything. Theory of Everything 17, the origins of government and the government of Moses. Okay, we talked a little bit last time about Moses and about the conditions for Moses, right? So, what we like to do on this channel is to qualify biblical understanding and to link it to historical times to be able to um, prove that the Bible is a historical book and not just a religious book. The Bible is unique in this aspect because it encompasses, lots of genres of writing together to form a complete story. You've got historical writing, you've got prophetic writing, and you've got uh, uh, like lineage as well, like kingships and poetry and prophecy and all of these different things that combine together to tell a story of the past, a story of the present, and a story of the future. And the book itself purports to be able to tell the future. And so far, so good. And this is the only book in the history of the world that has been able to do this and to continue to be relevant, not only relevant, but prevalent throughout all of the generations of its existence. Okay, so Moses, um, the circumstances for Moses are clearly seen historically. For one, let's just start off with the way that the Bible is composed. We talked about this a little bit last time in the last theory of everything, that whoever the author for the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, whoever the author was for those first 5 books, was definitely a Hebrew that spoke Egyptian also. Whoever this person was used a lot of Egyptian words in the Torah, but not Egyptian words or the Egyptian language, but Egyptian words that were transliterated into Hebrew, as if some Hebrew person was writing an Egyptian word in Hebrew. So this would only come from an era that we know that the Hebrews and the Egyptians lived uh, alongside one another. And if we look at the Bible, we can see that continued throughout as a theme as the Bible continues to be written by, successive generations that come after Moses. You'll see Aramaic written during the Babylonian captivity. You'll see some Persian in the Persian captivity. You see a lot of Greek in the Greek captivity. And so that follows with history, and it follows with the captivities that uh, the Israelites have been placed into with the leading nations of the time. So the first proof that the Bible was written by Moses is that the author of, or the Torah was written by Moses, is that the author of the Torah was also Egyptian, was Hebrew and Egyptian. We also know that, and here's another thing that I didn't finish in the last video that I want to address in this video for the naysayers out there that believe that the Bible was written in modern times, not modern, but in the common era, you would say, and by people who were looking to fool people into believing it was an ancient document. So one of the proofs that they supposedly have for this is that at the end of the book of Deuteronomy, which is the last book of the Torah, Moses dies, right? Moses dies, so he couldn't have written that part because he was dead, right? And so what naysayers will say is that, oh, well, look here, how could Moses have written the Torah if at the end of the Torah he dies? Well, if you don't know anything about history and the Israelites and the Bible, you'd say, oh, well, that's a good point. He couldn't have written it. Just like at the end of Joshua, Joshua dies, so Joshua couldn't have written that either. Right? Wrong. And so, how is that wrong? Because we know that the Israelites and other groups too maintained a steady school of scribes throughout the entire history of Israel. There were always scribes and there were always schools of scribes. So, what schools of scribes would do is they would be responsible for carrying the information from the text from one generation to the other. And what they would do a lot of times is memorize the text. They would memorize it so that when anyone went to point out something in the text, the scribe would be able to quote it, would be able to understand it, and would be able to relay it because he's written it and is the actual carrier, the prescribed holder of the information of the text, these scribes. And there were several schools of scribes all the way down through Israelite history, but one in particular we know of that specifically compiled all the biblical texts that were in existence at the time, rewrote them, and put them into an easily formatable, not a Bible, a book where you can get all the 66 books together, all the books that they had at that time together, but into a structure that everybody could easily get to and recognize. And each book was rewritten and put into a format that would be easily accessible, and that would be Ezra. Ezra was the one that did that. He's the one that gathered up all of the information, rewrote the scripture, and categorized it and cataloged it. So that's why we have all of these books with, at the end of the book, in particular Deuteronomy and Joshua, where it tells you kind of a synopsis of the story on up going to the next book, which would be Joshua and then Judges. And that's why it says in the book of Judges too that some of those things exist unto this day. And so it wasn't only Ezra who had this task as well. It was also Samuel. Samuel also did this task too. And there were people in every generation that had the task of keeping and continuing to write the biblical history. So Moses starts off the scribal practices in right in the Egyptian times, and then going forward, he continues it on further down beyond his lifetime into the next lifetime, into the next generation going forward. And this practice continues all the way up until the time when the temple was destroyed, and the information at that point was dispersed among the nations, just like we were. Not only were the Israelites dispersed among the nations at that time, the last of the southern tribes at that time, in 70 AD, but also the information too. You can see murals in Rome, I think it's Vespasian's Wall, where they're carrying out the sacred items from the temple after it was destroyed. You can see a menorah being carried out. You can see a bunch of different things in the mural that Rome depicted to commemorate their destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. They carried out all that information and they kept it, and they disseminated a lot of it throughout their empire. You'll see even today paintings of Black Madonna in the Orthodox Christian church in East Europe. You'll see Black Madonna paintings in Catholicism. And you'll have in that Catholic empire that exists today a lot of that ancient information. And the reason why the Catholic empire is so strong today is because the Roman Empire was able to secure those documents and then figure out that they were true and use them to their advantage. And so we see now today that, going back to Moses here, that a lot of the government or the style of government exists based off of the Bible, based off of the understanding of the Bible. Even when you go into a courtroom today and you swear to give honest testimony, and this is modern day Babylon. America is modern day Babylon, which is antithetical to biblical understanding. But even with that being the case, the court system is set up based on swearing, your testimony on a Bible, on a true word. Why aren't you swearing on, Newton's laws or um, origin of species, any of these supposedly scientific books, right? Why aren't you swearing on, what is it, Principia that Isaac Newton wrote? Um, you know, calculating gravity and calculus and all those things. These supposedly true and historical books that are we base our understanding on modern life based around these books. Why aren't we swearing on them? We're swearing on the Bible because we know that the Bible is a true book, and that the world, whether they recognize it or not, uses the Bible as its source of law and of order and structure. The judges, the concept of the judge, the concept of not necessarily having a king, because of course, for the first 400 years of Israelite history, there was no king, um, and the implementation of how things work. People being, in prison for a certain amount of time, people being cast out of the camp, isolation, quarantine. All of these different ideas come from the Bible, come from the Torah. And so you have Moses as being the author of the modern style of government, coming directly from Yah. Moses being the author of the modern style of governance. The modern style of governance comes from Moses and the understanding of Moses. And so when we look at history and we look at who are the true innovators of the world that we see around us, we still come up with Abraham, Moses, Yahusha, the people that we've always known in our history. I mean, even in American history, as being important. These are the people that have shaped our modern understanding of society. And so now Moses, if you take a look at Moses in his deliverance of the government, he receives it from up on high, from the Almighty. And if you notice that before Israel went into the wilderness, if you look at Ezekiel 16, before Israel went into the wilderness, you couldn't really call them a nation unto themselves. In fact, if you look at history and if you look at Egypt during that time, there was a group of people called the Hyksos people. And any of you that look in history will be able to find that the Hyksos people in Egypt were a very, very powerful group of influential people that mysteriously left for, historically no reason from Egypt during the time of Moses. These Hyksos, they call them the Hyksos kings because at one point in time they ruled Egypt. That you can see that when they came in, they began to rule, and that there was a significant amount of leadership coming from these Hyksos kings. And from Egyptian definition of the Hyksos kings, they were Semitic. They were from the the son Shem, which is where the Israelites come from as well. So you have in secular history a group of people called the Hyksos kings, which would have been considered Semitic people that lived and were influential people in Egypt that during, the 14th, 15th century BC disappear, leave from Egypt abruptly. This you can look up Hyksos kings. It's spelled Hyksos, Hyksos kings. They were a group of Hebraic people that lived in Egypt at the time that the Bible says that there should have been Hebraic people there, right? And then they leave abruptly from Egypt for no explanation and no reason in history, right? We know because the Bible tells us why they left, that Yah delivered them through Moses. So we do know this. We know this for a fact. These Hyksos kings were known in Egypt by the name Habaruz or Abaruz or Apiru. And so if you can have a one for one um, understanding of what the term Hebrew is, that the term Hebrew comes from the phrase ha abri or ha abar, which is the term for Hebrew, one that crosses over from the man Eber. You know, he was a descendant of or a ancestor of Abraham. Um, two sons, Joktan and Peleg. So down that line, you get to Abraham, then Isaac and Jacob, and then you have the Israelites. And this group of people were called Habarus or Ha'abarus in Egypt. These people that mysteriously disappeared out and had ruled Egypt at one time during the 15th centuries BC in Egypt. So again, you have historical record matching with biblical fact, right? You put the two together and you have the same story, okay? Another um, another coinciding uh, fact that also qualifies the biblical story, or should qualify it in your mind, is that there's a weirdness going on with the kingship around the time of Moses. And so the time of Moses is disputed as well among scholars, for kind of flimsy reasons. And I'll tell you that a lot of the scholarship that comes about the Bible is designed to debunk it, right? Designed to debunk the scripture. Because we know the world that we live in, and we know that the devil controls society and controls scholarship. So a lot of this is going to be there, but you can't hide the truth for very long. What you'll have is a cover story, and then the truth will come out underneath it or alongside it, and then one will be promoted over the other. So, with that being said, we look at the book of Exodus, where it talks about um, the treasure cities that the Israelite slaves built for Pharaoh. One of the treasure cities that they made was a city called Ramses, right? And so, because of this in Exodus, scholars have then placed the Exodus itself, the leaving of the Israelites out, if they'll admit that it exists, they place it at the time of Ramses, which is one Ramses in particular, which is around 1250 BC. So there's a problem with that. If you take 1250 BC and you calculate it up, then you'll run into not having enough time for the judges. You'll run into when was Jericho destroyed. You'll run into a lot of problems here on your timeline as far as, when the biblical understanding of Joshua, the judges, and then Saul and David and Solomon come into play. So that's way too late for Ramses to have been the Pharaoh of Moses. And they know that, and scholars know that. So we go back 200 years to a time of another Pharaoh named Tutmosis III, right? Tutmosis III, right? And I'll get into a little bit about the name Tutmosis too, because that's important as well. And maybe I should do that. Well, we'll do that next. So Tutmosis III had a daughter, right? And this daughter was weird because Tutmosis III was sickly in some instances. He wasn't able to fully lead. And if you want to do the research on this, I believe it was Tutmosis III that had the issues that couldn't lead, and his daughter, Queen Hatshepsut, was an interesting princess slash queen because she was a princess slash queen. When it became clear that Tutmosis was not going to be able to control Egypt because of his sickliness, Hatshepsut stepped up and became not just princess but queen. And she began to rule Egypt during that time, so much so that she began to commission statues and graffiti. What do you call it? Hieroglyphics that depict her as being the pharaoh. Like she puts herself as having Pharaoh, snake crown, the snake headdress, and then even a beard in some pictures. Um, so you'll have a situation during the time of Tutmosis when you have a princess who is also a queen, a princess who is also a queen, and this princess queen is having problems delivering the government, and her father, the pharaoh, is having problems also because he's sickly, right? And I hope I'm not getting these two guys confused because there's Tutmosis 3 and Tutmosis 4. But because of this, Hatshepsut would have been uniquely in the market for a son king, right? She would have been uniquely on the hunt for a son to be able to deliver the government of Egypt. And so we have the biblical story where there is a princess that finds a child, floating on down the river, and rescues this child, knows it's a Hebrew child, and then raises him in the palace, to be king of Egypt. And now people don't understand that this particular princess slash queen, and then we know she's a princess slash queen because, she's called queen in some instances and princess in other ones. Josephus, describes that, as well as the Bible, as well as the Quran and some ancient Muslim documents as well. They call her sometimes princess, sometimes queen. And so this situation is unique in Egyptian history to Hatshepsut, right? So what we find then is the unique set of circumstances which require for an Egyptian princess queen to be looking for a male child to rule Egypt. And what people don't understand is she was doing that. She was looking for someone that she could raise to be king over Egypt. And that's what happened. So Moses, if you also follow Josephus, Moses was not only a prince in Egypt, but he was also a general. He could also fight and was adept at leading men. And they found that out very early on because, and this is not in the Bible, it's in Josephus, and Josephus recounts this specifically. So it's remarkable that it's not in the Bible, but Josephus recounts it, so it must have at one point in time been there. So Moses in Egypt, as an Egyptian, leads an army of Egyptians and Israelites, I believe Israelites too, to war against Ethiopia, and wins the war. And wins the war so decisively that he leaves as king of Ethiopia too. This is what people are not understanding about Moses. He was at one point in time prince of Egypt and king of Ethiopia. And the reason why he was king of Ethiopia is because the queen of Ethiopia, which we know Ethiopia had queens for a very long time, the Candace queens, even in, up until the modern era after 00 AD, that the queens were very important in Ethiopia. And what Moses does is he goes and conquers Ethiopia, and he's such a handsome man. Josephus describes him as being a handsome man, so handsome that even as a baby, that people would stop and look at him for his handsomeness. But the queen of Ethiopia sees him, sees his leadership style, sees how handsome he is, sees him winning the war, and falls in love with him and gives herself to him and marries him, right? And so as the queen, that would make Moses then the king of Ethiopia. And so Ethiopia is conquered during the time of Moses by Moses and becomes a part of Egyptian territory based off of Moses's leadership and fighting ability and handsomeness too. So we see that also when we look at the way that the Bible describes him as being a leader in later times, right? And so we see the entire biblical situation coming to play historically as well with secular outside of Hebraic sources, right? And so there's a final piece of information that also details why Moses is so important in Egyptian history, and um, historically relevant as being a real person. Again, the connection that we have between Hebrew and Egyptian is clear. So when you look at the names of the pharaohs of Egypt, you'll find a really interesting thing there. So look at Tutmosis, right? The term Tutmosis. You see Moses right there in the name, right? Look at the term Ramses. Ramses is actually Ra Moses, because Ra is the name of a Egyptian deity. Tut is the name of an Egyptian deity. Tutmosis means Tut has delivered. And we don't use their names so much, but only in learning um, and only in teaching circumstances do we use their names. So we're not really supposed to call them names of other deities. But this particular deity was one of the deities that was worshipped in Egypt, and the kingly names were named after these deities. So Tutmosis and Ramoses, both of these lines of pharaohs, because there's more than one Tutmosis, there's four. There's more than one Ramses, there's a bunch. These line of pharaohs are all named Moses, right? And then here you have a princess naming a son who she intends to make king later on. Later on, you have her naming this child Moses, a kingly name, right? Right here in the Bible, right there in script, do we have an Egyptian king name for a Hebrew boy. So that's another very strong piece of evidence that what the Bible is saying is true. And see, the Bible is saying a great thing here, because what the Bible is saying is that deliverance, the history of deliverance, is real and supernatural, right? Because you have 10 supernatural plagues to befall Egypt in order for the Israelites to be released and to be able to form their own government. And with all the historical ties to the story, to the person Moses, then you also have to then follow that the biblical story is also true. That the biblical story of the plagues that befell Egypt is true. Not only is it true, it's the history of salvation, the very beginning of salvation for these people. In the Bible, the name, the place, I should say, that is most often mentioned in the Bible is, of course, Israel, right? The second place that is most often mentioned in the Bible, a huge amount of times, is Egypt. Because this is the history of Yah delivering his people. And it's the most important part because it's the very beginning. It's the first deliverance, right? So the history of salvation begins at Egypt. And if you don't understand that, if you believe it's some mythical story, then you've taken your own history and discounted it. You've taken your own Elohim and discounted him and his ability to rescue you. Do you see what I'm saying? That he's using his past abilities, his past actions to qualify his future ones, right? Because we know that there's going to be a second Exodus as well, where all of the Israelites from all over the world are taken up and brought back to Israel. You know, we know the book of Isaiah, chapter 11, talks about that. So this is salvation history that you've got to understand. Supernatural salvation history that is important for you to get. Not only that, they get it. Do you see what I'm saying? They, when I say they, I mean our captors in this particular era, which would be the Europeans. They understand that this is salvation history, and they're working very, very hard to keep you from understanding that. And that's why we don't believe these to be real stories or just, mythology meant for, finding a lesson in or a moral, because they don't want you to know that you have the ability to be saved, that you're in a captivity now that mimics the exact same circumstances of Egypt, and you have Moseses being raised up every generation that they kill. But you don't know that they're Moseses because you don't understand yourself as being a descendant of Moses or descendant of Israel. And you don't understand that you're in captivity in the same way that he was. And then you don't understand that you have the ability through Yah to escape from that captivity based on your keeping the commandments. Even without keeping the commandments, based on your cries, you're crying out to Yah for salvation. You have the ability to then, or you have Yah having the ability to raise up a deliverer among you to save you. And they know that. If you look in the FBI in the 60s and 70s from the COINTELPRO operation, they found documents outlining the fact that they were actively pursuing and eliminating people that they thought would be raised up to be messiahs. And they used the word messiah specifically. They said we must neutralize any black messiah that raises out of the pro-black movement. That was a law. That was a rule, an objective of the FBI, and by extension, an objective of the American government to root out the messiahs that would come out of the enslaved Israelites of America. Do you see what I'm saying? The fact that you don't know that these messiahs are going to be coming is a problem because they keep killing them, right? And you don't know that they're out there for you. If you look at the book of Judges, you have a cycle that goes from, and we talked about this last time too, to the children of Israel crying out under captivity, Yah seeing that and raising a deliverer, the deliverer delivering the children of Israel from their captivity, and then leading a style of government in Israel to be able to set the laws in motion and to make sure that they are upheld. And then when that particular deliverer dies, then the children of Israel go back into captivity based on their wickedness for not following the instructions after the deliverer dies. So that deliverer in the book of Judges, the word that they use is Mashiach or Messiah or Mashiach. Very similar to the word Moshe, right, or Moshe. The same two-letter root, mush or mash, which is an Egyptian and a Hebrew word, which stands for deliverance. That's what it means, right? And so you're looking at a multifaceted, multicultural, multi-era prophecy here. Even in the names of the people that are being mentioned is prophetic. What also is important about Moses continuing is that he, again, and we talked about this before, that he established the style of governance for, the modern world, and even by name, because what Josephus does, and when he's describing Moses, is he describes him as delivering the Constitution. So as you can see, even the terminology that Josephus uses has been, lifted and reincorporated into American society because we have a constitution, right? Well, no, earlier, thousands of years earlier, this man, Moses, delivered a constitution. And when Josephus was talking about what Moses did, he describes it as what's called a constitution in Greek. And so the Torah, the Ten Commandments, are a declaration of freedom. They are the constitution of the Israelite nation. And it's the first constitution of all constitutions. So we ourselves have the structure of government that the entire world uses on our own already. Do you understand what I'm saying? That the entire world uses the style of government that we adopted through Yah, through Moses. And so they know that we have the ability to take control, to lead, to implement righteous laws, and for the world to be righteous based on this. And they're fighting against that. That's what America is. It's taking the style of government that comes from us, perverting it, warping it, and then putting it back out on us in order to enslave us. It's the only way that it could even actually work. because it's the most successful and popular style of governance in all of history. And we know this for a fact. We know it. They've had to go back and change the complexion of Moses. We know they've had to go back and change the style that Moses delivered his government, because we see now that through Jesus, that Moses was entirely, the laws and commandments that Moses implemented through Yah are wiped out, because you don't even in modern Christianity, not even the Ten Commandments are taken seriously, because only a very, very small population of Christians even keep the Sabbath day. Seventh-day Adventists are like less than 1% of the whole of Christianity, and them and a couple of other congregations are the only ones keeping the Sabbath. And that's just one commandment out of the 10, let alone the rest of the 10, the other 9. This one commandment that 99.9% of all Christianity breaks just on a regular basis. Do you see what I mean? So with Jesus, the false Messiah, we know his name was really Yahusha. We know he was black. And we know that he didn't get rid of the law in, Matthew 5. Think not that I come to destroy the law, but to fulfill. For not one jot or tittle, yod or tittle, will be removed from the law until all is fulfilled, right? So we know that Yahusha didn't come to destroy the law, but somehow Jesus, the concept of Jesus, does. That somehow you don't have to keep the law anymore. So that's important to know, because the law comes through Moses, and it's Moses' style of government that they're saying that you don't have to keep anymore. Your historical style of government that you use and that they use on you behind your back without you knowing it, they're saying that you don't have to keep it anymore. Do you understand what I mean? They're keeping you lawless while at the same time using your laws to enslave you with them, right? This is the importance of understanding that Moses has come from your people and that Yah is your Elohim, because this is your ability to redeem yourself from that position. That Yah raises up a Moses, a Messiah, a Yahusha, and you're delivered. And then you live in a righteous government being, implemented by your deliverer, which in our case, in this modern era, will be Yahusha, right? This is the importance of understanding Moses and understanding that Moses' law is not done away with. The Mosaic law is not done away with. It is the style of government that everyone uses already. It's just that you don't know that you, black man, your government is being used against you, right? So again, this is Theory of Everything 17. I'm trying to figure out, it looks like somebody's coming, if I've left anything out, because there were some specific things that I wanted to go over, and I hope that I hit every single one of them. But this has been Theory of Everything 17. Moses delivers the government. Shalom, shalom, y'all. Shabbat shalom.